I was standing in the backyard holding a pink and gold cake with 7 candles that refused to stay lit in the wind. My daughter Zariah sat at the party table we had decorated with glitter balloons and streamers the night before. She kept glancing toward the gate as if any second it would swing open, and her friends would rush in laughing, carrying presents, filling the space with noise and joy. I kept telling her they would show up, that someone would come, but the hours passed and no one did. The air smelled of frosting and wilting flowers, but beneath it was the heavier scent of disappointment. I checked my phone again, scrolling through messages that weren't there. Nothing. Just silence. Until one cruel text cut through the emptiness like a blade. "Who wants to celebrate a girl with no dad?" My hands shook as I read it, bile rising in my throat. I couldn't show her that. I forced a smile, plastered it on my face like armor, and carried the cake over anyway. Zariah clapped softly for herself. Just her. Her tiny palms together in a soundless rhythm of hope. I lit the candles, shielding the flame with my body against the stubborn breeze. She looked up at me with those wide, trusting eyes and whispered, "It's okay, Mama. Maybe they just forgot." The words crushed me. My little girl, only 7, was already learning to excuse cruelty, already learning to protect me from the pain she felt. I swallowed hard, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Make a wish, baby." She closed her eyes, lashes trembling, and leaned toward the candles. But before she could blow them out, the world seemed to shift. A low rumble echoed from the street, faint at first, then louder like thunder rolling in clear skies. Zariah's head snapped up. Her chair scraped back so fast it toppled. She grabbed my hand, eyes wide with something between fear and wonder. "Mom," she gasped. "That's my letter. That's Daddy's friends." I didn't understand, not yet. The sound grew multiplied until it was undeniable, engines, heavy and powerful, approaching our house. I stood frozen still, clutching the cake, while my daughter nearly vibrated with anticipation. She had been waiting for something, for someone. And in that moment, I realized she hadn't given up. Not like me. She had believed in hope enough to send it out into the world, and now hope was answering. My name is Ayla, and if you asked me to sum up the last 2 years of my life in a single word, I'd say trying. Not just hard, not just painful, but relentless effort. Trying to wake up, trying to breathe, trying to smile for my daughter when all I wanted was to collapse into the emptiness my husband's death had left behind. Micah was my everything, a soldier, a veteran, and a man whose laughter filled every corner of this house. He rode motorcycles with a club of other servicemen brothers bonded by grease, courage, and scars. He always came home smelling of oil with grease under his nails, and Zariah running into his arms. Until one night, he didn't. A roadside bomb doesn't care about promises or families waiting at home, or little girls brushing their teeth in the next room. The phone call came after dinner. I heard my daughter humming as she stood on a stool to reach the sink. And then the world split open. Micah was gone, just like that. Since then, it's been me and Zariah, 2 fragile souls stumbling through the shadows. She's soft-spoken, bright-eyed with her father's curiosity and his gift for fixing broken things, even things that aren't hers to fix. She talks about him constantly, as if keeping his memory alive will bring him back. She prays to him. She still calls him Daddy, like he's about to walk through the door any moment. This year, she begged for a real birthday party. The last 2 years had been quiet, cake at the kitchen table, maybe a movie if I could stay composed long enough. But this time she wanted balloons, she wanted rainbows, she wanted motorcycles because Daddy loved both. How could I say no? So we planned it. Handmade invitations with glitter and stickers passed out to classmates and neighbors. A playlist of Micah's favorite off-key country songs. Streamers, chairs, decorations. She woke up early that morning, put on her sparkly dress, brushed her own hair, helped me carry cupcakes outside. She looked at me with shining eyes and asked, "How many people do you think will come, Mama?" "All the good ones," I lied. But as the sun climbed high, excitement slipped into confusion, then silence. The driveway stayed empty, the gate stayed shut. My daughter's small hands fidgeted with her party crown. The balloons drooped in the summer heat. I tried to distract her. I cut the cake early. I danced to the playlist. I told her people must be lost or running late. She didn't cry, she just whispered I still had fun with you. That broke me more than anything, because I knew she was lying. The text message from another parent was the final blow. Who wants to celebrate a girl with no dad? I wanted to scream, to call them monsters, to demand how they could let a child's grief be an excuse for cruelty. But I stayed silent. I picked up the cake with trembling hands and lit the candles anyway. Because that's what mothers do. We smile when it hurts. We stand when our knees want to buckle. We carry the weight of the world so our children can keep believing in it. And Zariah, she still believed. She reached under the table, pulled out an envelope, and handed it to me without a word. I sent it weeks ago, she said softly. Inside was a letter in her messy handwriting. A letter to Micah's old motorcycle club, to his brothers. I thought maybe they'd come, she whispered. I stared at the page, tears blurring the words. My little girl had more courage than I had shown in 2 years. She hadn't waited for the world to show up. She had asked. She had reached out. And now, as engines roared closer, rattling the windows and making the ground tremble beneath our feet, I realized she had been right to hope. The party wasn't over. It hadn't even begun. Engines multiplied like a chorus, one joining another, until the sound filled the street and curled into our yard. The first rider turned the corner with a slow, deliberate grace that didn't feel like swagger so much as ceremony. Then another, and another. Chrome caught the sun and scattered it across our fence in shards. Leather vests fluttered like small flags, and the smell of gasoline braided itself through the scent of frosting and wilting roses. My breath snagged on some invisible hook in my chest. Zariah squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, and then forgot to breathe entirely until the front bike idled at the curb and the rider swung a boot to the pavement. He lifted his helmet, swept a line of road dust off his brow with a knuckle, and broke into a smile I recognized from a dozen cookouts, softened eyes, crow's feet, a gentleness that doesn't cancel toughness so much as prove it can live beside it. It was Bear Micah's oldest friend from the club, a man with hands like shovels who used to let my daughter paint his pinky nail purple and pretend his cussing meant nothing when she was near. He didn't look at me first. He looked at her. He said her name like it was a permission he needed before stepping onto our grass. She nodded, and the nod seemed to summon the rest. Engines went quiet one by one, metal ticking in the sun. Helmets came off. Faces appeared, some I knew, some I didn't, veterans who'd eaten at our table. Men who'd carried my husband's casket with their shoulders squared and their jaws set. 2 women I had never met wearing the same patched vests, their braids tucked into collars, eyes bright. Our block, which usually pretended not to see what it disapproved of, pressed itself against windows and curtains, peeking through slits, as if truth might slip in if they opened the blinds all the way. Bear crouched to meet my daughter at eye level. He didn't make a joke, didn't pat her head. He just said they got her letter. His voice found the careful middle between reverence and pride. He said the envelope had shown up at the clubhouse with her tiny handwriting on the front and a sticker of a rainbow crooked across the corner. He said they read it out loud. Twice. He said there are orders a commander gives and there are orders a family obeys, and the letter she wrote felt like both. Zaria glanced at me as if asking if hope was real, if she could let it touch her without it evaporating. I nodded once because I didn't trust my mouth. Bear reached into his vest and pulled out 2 things. The first was her envelope edges softened from being passed between large hands, the flap resealed with a piece of clear tape where someone had read and then tucked it closed like a promise. The second was a smaller envelope with our address in a slanted, impatient script that sliced me to the bone just to see it, Micah's handwriting. I sucked in air that didn't reach my lungs. Bear didn't hand it to me right away. He held my gaze searching, and when he saw I wouldn't crumple, he set it gently in my palm like something living. He said they'd meant to bring that to us long ago. He said the club has traditions, and one is to make sure letters written just in case never sit in dark drawers. But grief is a storm that knocks the schedule out of everyone's hands, and then the clubhouse moved, and a box went into storage, and some months had gone missing under bills and deployments and the long, dull ache of surviving. He looked ashamed in a way that made me want to forgive him instantly, because people who carry the heavy things for you deserve a margin of error. And still, the envelope burned. My husband's voice was inside paper. My fingers curled as if they could reach through it. But Zariah tugged Bear's sleeve, drawing attention back to the letter that had actually brought them here, the one she had written and sent with a stamp she'd peeled off a Christmas card. He asked if he could read it for the others, and she nodded again, small and solemn like a judge. Bear cleared his throat and unfolded the page, and the lines of pencil lead came alive in his big hands. She had written that she missed her dad most on birthday mornings, and at night, when she remembered the sound of his boots in the hall. She had written that her class made fun of her for not having a father to bring to Donut Day, and that a girl at school told her people like her don't get real parties. She had asked, and this is where my knees almost buckled, if the club could please make a little noise in their hearts for her on her day, because when she closed her eyes, she heard engines and felt less alone. The backyard absorbed the words like ground taking rain after a drought. The bikers didn't whoop or pound their chests. They bowed their heads at the language of loneliness, familiar to men who had spent long nights in far countries, listening to mortars and their own thoughts. Bear finished, folded the paper, and then stood with that slight sway men have when they carry weight in their bones. He asked for permission to come in, not to take over, not to rescue, but to be present. I said yes with my whole body. They didn't flood the yard in an instant. They moved like a tide, rolling steady but respectful. One woman, her patch, said Cinder took command of the grill with the assurance of someone who had cooked for hungry platoons. Another rolled up the deflated balloons and replaced them with pennants from their clubhouse party stash, bright strips of color snapping into the breeze like new breath. A tall rider with a gentle stoop introduced himself as Lobo and asked my daughter if she would accept a spare helmet he had painted years ago for a niece who grew out of it. The paint was scuffed, but it glittered in the sun like something enchanted. Someone unfolded a card table and boxes appeared from saddlebags, like a magic trick, small gifts wrapped in brown paper and twine. Nothing flashy, everything chosen with care, pencils and sketchbooks, and a book of knots and a compass and a bracelet, woven from paracord in her favorite colors. The paracord bracelet's clasp clicked, and I found myself absurdly relieved by the sound. Things that click shut feel like safety. Neighbors materialized on our fence line, feigning friendliness they hadn't offered this morning. I don't know whether it was the spectacle that drew them, or the sight of a child being seen in a way that forced them to see her too. Either way, I resisted the urge to perform. The club did not perform either. They attached streamers to mirrors and lined their bikes up like a guard of honor. They teased each other gently, not us. They asked Zariah how old she was, and what kind of cake she liked best, and whether the purple on her party crown had a name, or if purple was the whole story. She told them it was lilac. She said it with certainty that warned everyone to take her seriously. When it was time for candles, the wind died obediently, like it knew better than to misbehave at this particular ritual. Bear set the cake down and stepped back. No one said anything about making a wish. Wishes are private currency. But as she drew in her breath, Zariah caught my eye and gave me a look that aged her and made her small again all at once. I knew that look from the hospital the day she was born, from the living room the night we told her dad wasn't coming home from 100 ordinary mornings when we had to choose to try. She exhaled. The flames vanished. The cheer that followed didn't roar, it bloomed. I didn't mean to open Micah's envelope in front of anyone, but my hands had their own plans, and grief has never asked permission to enter a scene. I slid a finger under the flap and unfolded 3 pages. The first was to me, the second to Zariah, the third addressed, "To whoever loves them when I can't." The ink looked like him, forceful, a little messy, impatient with margins. He told me to buy myself a pair of boots that wouldn't make my feet blister, and to eat the first slice of cake even if guilt told me to serve everyone else first. He told our daughter that if pictures of dragons could be real, she should draw them until they were, that engines are music. If you listen right, that fear is allowed to sit in the sidecar but not to steer. To the person who would step in around the edges, he wrote thank you in a way that made the air waver. At the bottom, he had scrawled something I didn't understand until I raised my eyes in a dress and a date. Bear saw it too and nodded like the gear in his mind had just meshed with the tooth it had been searching for. There was a storage unit. Of course there was. Micah had always planned as if the worst was a weather pattern you could prepare for with a careful list and a small prayer. Bear said that after cake, if I was willing, they could take us there. Not to make a spectacle, not to plunder the past, but because rituals mean little if you don't tie them to something you can hold. I looked at my daughter, chocolate icing already on her lip, the helmet tilted beside her on the table like a promise, and she nodded as if he had asked whether it was okay to breathe. Before we left, Cinder crouched by Zariah and did something I will carry with me into every dark room I ever enter. She took off her own patch and with a practiced flick attached a small version of it to the strap of my daughter's new helmet. She said out loud what all of them had been behaving like since they arrived, that family can be blood, and it can be choice. And sometimes the most faithful form of kinship is the one that shows up uninvited by the neighborhood, invited by a little girl's pencil letters and a man's love that refused to end at a phone call. We rode in a strange parade to the storage unit, me in the car, because my legs felt like laundry, and my daughter in the SUV between Cinder and Lobo, her small hand on the window tracing clouds. The unit opened with the slow reluctance of doors that have been keeping a story safe. Inside were boxes labeled in Micah's shorthand. One said birthdays in block letters, and I couldn't make my lungs behave after that. Another said routes, and held maps drawn with squiggled lines and notes about gas stations with decent coffee. At the back, a crate waited with our names on it. Bear lifted the lid and found wrapped packages numbered 1 through 18 all the way to the year our daughter would be an adult. The one marked 7 was on top, wrapped in the comics section of a newspaper, sealed with the same blue painter's tape Micah always used when he couldn't find the real stuff. Inside was a tiny denim vest, with a patch already sewn on, stitches uneven, but stubborn as his grin. There was a note pinned to the collar. If I'm not there to teach you wind, someone will. Wear this when you feel small. I pressed the vest to my face and inhaled dust and a ghost of his cologne and something else, rope and road and intention. My daughter slid into it, too big in the shoulder, perfect in the way oversized clothes are perfect because they leave room to grow. She stood taller as if the fabric contained secret supports. The riders turned away under the pretense of examining maps, giving us privacy to configure our new shape. On the drive home, the sky did that late afternoon trick where it looks like it's thinking about raining but can't commit. I watched our little convoy in the rearview mirror and understood that the people who had whispered we were a house missing a wall had no idea what architecture could do with tensile strength. You can build bridges that hold entire cities with nothing but cables and trust if you understand how weight distributes. The club understood weight. They didn't take ours, they stood under it with us until it felt different. Back in the yard, the cake was half gone and the balloons had found their second wind. The neighbors had decided we were worth approving of now that a spectacle had been properly sanctified by uniforms of another sort. I didn't care. My daughter's laugh had unfurled into the kind that runs ahead of itself and waits at corners. She tugged Bear's sleeve and asked if maybe just once she could sit on a bike while it idled, feet planted, hands on the grips, a queen trying on a crown. He lifted her with that unbearable care big men learn when they carry tiny things. She sat very still, reverent, and then she grinned. The engine sang a low song, and somewhere in it I heard my husband laugh. When the sun dipped, Bear squeezed my shoulder and said they would be back, not to swarm our lives, but to bracket them, to show up on days when shadows had sharp edges. I believed him. I believed in something I had not allowed myself to touch since the funeral. The possibility that grief is a room with more than one door, and one of them opens onto a road where people who loved the same person you did will ride beside you until you remember how to hold your own handlebars again. Night arrived like a soft coat. The riders rolled away one by one, lights blinking like distant stars. Our yard, which had started the day as a small stage for loneliness, felt wider now, as if it had learned a new shape. I carried empty plates to the kitchen. Zariah trailed me with the vest still on the helmet tucked in the crook of her arm. She leaned against my hip while I ran water and said her wish out loud, not to jinx it, but because some wishes are stronger when they hear themselves spoken. She didn't want to feel invisible anymore. I told her the truth. I had learned in 3 hours that felt like a lifetime. Visibility isn't a favor anyone grants. It's a right we claim, and a light we carry together. I set Micah's letter on the counter where the morning sun would find it. I would read it again and again and again until the paper thinned from my fingers and the ink set permanent grooves in my mind. For now, the house held its breath in a new way. Not waiting for disaster, but for continuation. That night after the bikes rumbled away and the sky stretched open with stars, I sat at the kitchen table with Micah's letter spread out in front of me. My fingers kept smoothing the paper, tracing the ridges of his writing as if touch could bridge the canyon of absence. Zariah had fallen asleep in her room, still wearing the too large denim vest, her small body curled around the stuffed bear she once said she'd outgrown. The sight of her like that, nestled in symbols of her father and innocence, sliced me in two. I wanted to let her keep sleeping in peace, but grief has a way of pulling mothers back to the table, to the hard wood, where memories get unpacked like unfinished work. Micah's words haunted me. Engines are music if you listen right. Fear is allowed in the sidecar, but not to steer. I kept hearing the growl of the bikes in my ears, now transformed from noise into rhythm. A rhythm of presence, a rhythm of defiance against the silence our so-called family and community had given us. Because that was the thing, wasn't it? Not just absence, betrayal. The classmates who sneered, the parents who looked away. The neighbors who pressed their blinds together like they could squeeze out their own guilt. My own mother, who had said not long after Micah's funeral, "Maybe now you'll come back down to earth and stop pretending life is a fairy tale." She'd never liked him, said bikers and veterans were dangerous men who lived too fast. But I knew better. And now, watching strangers show my daughter more love than her own blood, had I understood just how hollow my mother's words had always been. The next day, Bear called. His voice was low, steady. "We want to check on you two," he said. "We don't ride in and out like ghosts." There was something fatherly in his tone, not trying to replace Micah, but trying to stand shoulder to shoulder in the gap he'd left. I didn't know how to say yes without sounding desperate, so I just whispered, "Thank you." By evening, a few of them were back. Not the whole crew, just Bear, Cinder, and Lobo. They came not with thunder this time, but with groceries, a box of colored pencils, and an easy quiet that filled the house without overwhelming it. Zariah sat cross-legged on the living room rug, sketching dragons and dresses, while Cinder told her about riding across Nevada's deserts, where the sky feels like it touches the earth. Lobo helped me fix the broken latch on our back gate, not because I asked, but because he noticed. And then Bear set a photo album on the table. My throat closed as I opened it, pictures of Micah I'd never seen. Him at the clubhouse laughing with a hot dog in his hand. Him tinkering with an engine while grease streaked his forehead. Him holding a birthday cake for someone else's child, grinning with pride. They had kept these moments like relics, stored them when I was too wrapped in funeral black to notice the color left in the world. My hands shook as I turned each page, tears smearing the edges, but also strangely hope. Because Micah had not vanished into the void. His life had been woven into others, and they were bringing those threads back to us. Zaria pointed at a picture of her father and asked, "Mama, was this the day he came home with the keychain for me?" I nodded, remembering the way he'd held out the little plastic unicorn like it was treasure. She smiled, clutching her sketchbook tighter, and whispered, "He remembered me even then." My heart cracked again. Because the truth was, Micah always remembered her. He had written those 18 gifts into existence. He had left maps and vests and words as anchors. And yet our own family, living just miles away, couldn't even remember to send a card. The bikers didn't stay late. They packed up, hugged us goodbye, and promised to check in again soon. After they left, the house didn't feel empty. It felt supported, like beams had been installed overnight. I walked into Zariah's room to tuck her in, and she looked at me with wide eyes. Mama, she said, we're not alone anymore. I kissed her forehead and thought she's right. But not everyone shared her joy. When I finally answered my mother's call later that week, she wasted no time with greetings. I heard she said, her voice sharp as glass, that you let those bikers into your house. That you let them parade around the neighborhood. Do you want people to think you're desperate? Do you want to humiliate yourself further? The words dug into me the way they always had. But this time something inside me stood up straight. No, I replied, my voice firm. I want people to see that someone showed up for us when you didn't. She sputtered, accused me of dramatics of poisoning Zariah with fairy tale nonsense. I hung up before she could finish. My hands shook, but not with fear, with release. That night, I lay in bed listening to the quiet hum of the fridge, the distant bark of a dog, the steady breathing of my daughter down the hall. And I thought about betrayal, not just in the form of classmates who mocked her, but in the silence of those who should have loved her. Silence can be louder than cruelty. It can carve out wounds that never heal. And yet, in the roar of 20 motorcycles, I had heard an answer louder than silence. She matters. You matter. Over the next few weeks, the club kept their word. They stopped by with groceries, with school supplies, with nothing but presents. Not every day, not overwhelming, but steady. A kind of chosen family building itself around us. And as Zariah grew stronger, bolder, more herself, I felt myself beginning to heal too. One evening she asked me to light the candles on the cake again, just for us, no party, no balloons. Because this time, she whispered, I know the wish will work. I struck the match, watched the flame catch, and for the first time in years, I believed her. But the real test came at school. The same children who had mocked her birthday watched now as she walked into class wearing the too big denim vest with the patch Cinder had given her. They snickered. One boy muttered something about playing biker. But Zaria lifted her chin, set her sketchbook on the desk, and started drawing. She didn't shrink, she didn't cry. And when a teacher asked about the vest, she said proudly, It's from my dad and his family. That was the moment I knew the tide had turned. The letter had brought the bikers. The bikers had brought Micah back into our lives in pieces we didn't know were missing. And my daughter had found not only the courage to believe in hope, but the strength to live it out loud. I stood outside the school that day watching her through the window, and I thought maybe this is the revenge. Not spite, not cruelty, but living so boldly, so visibly, that no one can deny her again. And maybe, just maybe, it was my revenge too. It's strange how quickly whispers spread when people want to dress cruelty as curiosity. Within a week of the bikers arriving, my neighbors no longer pretended not to see us. They saw too much, now their eyes sticky with judgment. At the grocery store, I heard one mother hiss to another. She invited that gang into her yard. No wonder no one wanted to send their kids to the party. The words reached me like arrows, but this time they didn't pierce the way they used to. Because I had seen the truth, those so-called dangerous men and women had been more family to us in one afternoon than my own blood had managed in 2 years. But my own family wasn't content to gossip behind closed doors. My mother called again, her tone dripping with disdain. You're corrupting her, she said, letting her wear that vest like it's a badge. What will people think when they see her parading around like some orphan desperate for attention? She is an orphan, I snapped before I could stop myself. My chest tightened, but I didn't waver. She lost her father, and all you've done is remind her of that loss at every turn. If you can't be kind, then stay away. There was silence, then a low, bitter laugh. You'll regret shutting us out, she warned. No, I whispered into the phone before hanging up. I regret letting you in for so long. That was the night I unfolded Micah's letter again, searching for courage in the messy lines of his handwriting. My hands trembled as I reread the final page, the part addressed not to me or Zariah, but to whoever loves them when I can't. The words there carried something I had missed the first time. Not just gratitude, but instruction. Micah had written about trust, about choosing family beyond blood, about how the men he rode with had sworn oaths that didn't break at funerals. And at the bottom, almost scribbled in haste, was a single line that made my breath catch. Show her she belongs to the road as much as she belongs to you. The next Saturday, Bear and Cinder invited us to the clubhouse for a small gathering. My instinct was to decline fear, still curled around me like a stubborn vine. But Zariah begged, "Please, Mama, I want to go." Her eyes shone with the same belief that had carried her through disappointment. So I said yes. The clubhouse wasn't what I expected. It wasn't dark or grimy, not the chaos of stereotypes. It smelled of coffee and motor oil walls covered in photos, flags, and memorial plaques. There was laughter, warmth, and a kind of unspoken respect that wrapped around us the moment we walked through the door. Zariah slipped out of my grasp and ran straight to Cinder, who crouched to hug her like they'd known each other for years. Bear handed me a mug of coffee, his eyes soft with the kind of gentleness men like him rarely get credit for. And then they showed us something. On the far wall hung a framed picture of Micah grinning wide, his arm slung around Bear's shoulder. Below it was a plaque with his name engraved alongside others they had lost. Zariah stared up at it, her small hand pressed to the glass. "Daddy's here too," she whispered. Tears pooled in her lashes, but they weren't the tears of grief. They were recognition. Later, Bear placed a leather-bound journal in my hands. He wrote in this sometimes, he said. Not often, but enough. We thought you should have it. That night, after Zariah fell asleep, I opened the journal. Pages filled with half-finished thoughts, sketches of roots, doodles of dragons, his humor, his heart, pieces of him I had thought were gone forever. And tucked between 2 pages was a note I hadn't expected. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to our daughter. "Zaria, if you're reading this, it means the world turned in ways I prayed it wouldn't. But listen to me, you are not small. You are not forgotten. When people make you feel invisible, it's because they don't know how to see light that burns that bright. Shine anyway. And when you hear engines, remember, they are not just machines, they are voices saying, you are never alone." I pressed the pages to my face and wept until my body ached. But beneath the grief was something else, strength. Because these were not words meant to bury us, they were words meant to raise us. The next week, Zariah wore her denim vest to school again. The mocking came, of course. A group of girls snickered, whispering about how pathetic it was, how no one wanted to come to her party until the freaks showed up. But this time, my daughter stood tall. She didn't cry. She looked them in the eye and said, "Maybe you don't understand what family means. That's okay, I do." Her teacher told me later that the classroom fell silent. Some of the kids who had once mocked her looked away ashamed. And Zariah sat at her desk, pulled out her sketchbook, and began to draw. She was rewriting her own story in front of them. The real confrontation, though, came at a family dinner weeks later. My mother had insisted on hosting, claiming she wanted to mend fences. Against my better judgment, I agreed, part of me still desperate for reconciliation, for proof that blood could matter. It was a disaster. My mother barely looked at Zariah, and when she did, it was with thinly veiled contempt. "Jenna." My sister smirked when she saw the vest. "So this is the famous jacket," she said. "How cute. Playing biker now, are we?" I opened my mouth to speak, but Zariah beat me to it. She stood, her small frame trembling but her voice clear. "I'm not playing," she said. "This is from my dad, from people who love me, and if you can't love me too, then I don't need your table." The room froze. My mother's fork clattered to her plate. Jenna's smile faltered. And me? I felt something surge in my chest that I hadn't felt in years, pride fierce and unshakable. We left that dinner early. We didn't take leftovers, didn't accept hugs that weren't real. We walked out into the cool night air, our footsteps echoing like punctuation. And as we drove away, Zariah leaned her head against the window and whispered, "I told Daddy." Her words cracked me wide open, because in that moment I knew she wasn't broken. She was rising, and maybe finally so was I. The engines of betrayal, the laughter, the whispers, the cruelty had been loud. But louder still was the echo of loyalty, of chosen family, of a father's words carried forward through time. And I understood then this was our climax, the part of the story where wounds turned to weapons, where invisibility turned to light. When we drove home from that dinner, silence filled the car, but it wasn't the suffocating kind anymore. It was a silence of decision, of clarity. My daughter sat in the back seat still wearing her vest, her small hand curled around the strap like it was a lifeline. I glanced at her in the mirror, saw the glint in her eyes, and realized she hadn't just defended herself, she had defended us both. She had named the truth I had been too afraid to say: we didn't need their table anymore. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she whispered, "Mama." Daddy heard me, didn't he? I smoothed her hair back and kissed her forehead. "Yes, baby. He heard you. And he's proud." She smiled, drifting into sleep while I stood in the doorway and let the weight of everything settle. Pride, grief, loss, and strength, they tangled together inside me like threads of the same rope. For the first time, I felt that rope wasn't choking me anymore, it was holding me steady. The following weeks unfolded like chapters I hadn't dared to hope for. The bikers came by often, not in overwhelming waves, but in pairs and trios, always with something thoughtful. Cinder brought fabric scraps for Zariah's sketches, teaching her how to match textures with designs. Bear repaired the squeaky hinge on our gate again, insisting it was symbolic that doors should open smoothly. Lobo sat with me on the porch one evening, telling me about his own kids, how war had scarred him, and how it was chosen family that saved him. "Blood doesn't guarantee love," he said softly. "Showing up does." It sank into me in a way sermons never had. Meanwhile, the community that once looked at us with pity or disdain started shifting their gaze. At school, whispers about Zariah changed from mockery to curiosity. Teachers noticed her talent, encouraged her sketches. One day, she came home waving a certificate she had won first place in an art contest, her drawing of a winged dragon soaring over a motorcycle, blowing the judges away. "Daddy's in this," she told me proudly. "See, he's the dragon." I hung that picture on the fridge like it was a sacred icon, because it was. But with pride came confrontation. My mother tried again to reach out, showing up uninvited one afternoon. She stood on the porch looking smaller than I remembered, holding a plate of cookies like a peace offering. "I don't want to fight," she said. "I just don't want to lose you." For a moment, the old ache stirred, the part of me that longed for her approval. But then I thought of Zariah, of the vest, of the cruel silence at the birthday party. I thought of the bikers who had shown up without hesitation while my own mother had sat in her living room pretending grief was an inconvenience. "You already lost us," I said gently. "Not because we walked away, but because you never showed up." Her face crumpled, but I didn't open the door. Not this time. That evening I told Zariah what happened. She listened quietly, then took my hand. "It's okay, Mama," she said. "We don't need everyone to love us, just the right ones." She was right. She had always been right. Months passed. Birthdays, holidays, ordinary days. The bikers became part of our rhythm. Not every moment, but the important ones. When Zariah lost a tooth, Cinder came by with a silly tooth fairy patch. When she aced her spelling test, Bear dropped off a milkshake to celebrate. When she cried missing her father, they sat with her until the tears turned into laughter. They weren't replacing him. They were expanding him, carrying his love forward in ways he had trusted them to. And then the next birthday arrived. This time our yard wasn't empty. It was full. Kids from her class showed up, parents trailing behind them awkwardly, but carrying wrapped gifts, clearly aware of the shame of last year. But more importantly, the bikes were backlined in the driveway like guardians' engines rumbling a low hymn. Zariah wore her vest proudly, her crown tilted, her laughter loud. She blew out the candles, surrounded by cheers, and for once I didn't cry from pain, I cried from joy. Later that night, when the house was quiet again, I sat with Micah's journal in my lap. I read his words one more time: "Shine anyway." And I realized that was the lesson. Betrayal will come, family will fail, people will mock what they don't understand. But light doesn't wait for permission. Light shines anyway. Looking back now, I see it all differently. The empty table at her birthday wasn't the end, it was the beginning. It was the clearing of space for the ones who truly mattered to walk in. It was the stage for engines that carried love, for letters written in childish handwriting, for a father's words to echo beyond the grave. So if you are listening to this, If you've carried the weight of being unseen, if you've felt abandoned by those who should have stood beside you, hear me, your worth is not measured by who leaves. It is revealed by who shows up. And when they show up, whether they arrive on motorcycles or with quiet words or with nothing more than presence, let them in. Because that's how the story changes. That's how the light gets through. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to like this video, share it with someone who might need hope, and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss more stories like this. And please leave a comment, tell me if you've ever felt invisible and how you found your light again. Because when we share, we shine together. You are not invisible, you are not broken, and your story, like mine, is far from over.